Hi, I'm Lisa Tewksbury from the Plant Sciences Department at URI, and I'm happy to be speaking to Master Gardeners, and it's really exciting to speak to new Master Gardeners. So I've been at the university about 35 years, and I've worked in this biocontrol lab facility that you see here for about 25 years. And what we do at the lab is we work with introduced invasive insects and weeds, and we utilize insects to help manage them. And there's a lot that goes into that, and I'm actually in a later lecture going to tell you a little bit more about that. But if you're interested in what we do, since we're on the URI campus, this facility is tacked onto the end of the URI greenhouse at the corner of Flag Road and Upper College Road. And I have a lab manager who you'll hear from at some point. Her name is Alana Russell. She does a lot of outreach as well. You specifically may have seen her speaking to you about a new pest, the spotted lanternfly. And then here I have our website, and we have a Facebook page, and we also have Instagram. And we put up a lot of information about our students. We have URI students who work with us all year round, academic semesters, summers. And so you can learn a little bit about them and what they do if you check into some of those places. And this is just a little example of the website. We tell a little bit about biocontrol in case the concept is new to you. Biocontrol is part of integrated pest management. And in the second lecture, I'm going to be talking to you specifically about integrated pest management. My screenshot of this cut off the invasive species part, but we have a little bit of information about invasive species like spotted lanternfly, and hopefully have lots of resources for you. And please let us know, if you have suggestions of things to add, because we are trying to add it all the time. So this lecture is just going to give you a little bit of a feel for basic entomology, or just a little bit about insects. I want to try to share some of the unique features, some of the things I love about insects. And then after the 3 lectures, Alana and I are also going to do a live session with you. So I'm looking forward to that. And we're hoping to do a little bit of insect identification in that part. So this, I'm sharing the idea that insects are beautiful. Sometimes we tend to think of them as things that get in our way, but something like this Luna moth is just gorgeous, and we don't see them very often. Monarchs we see a little more often, but those, we know are having some difficulty with their overwintering sites and migration paths and things like that. So we love to see them, and we love to rear them. It's often done for outreach purposes. Sometimes it's for actual research, like it was this year. This is just a fun insect. We have dog day cicadas that we hear in the summer when it gets really, really hot out, in August especially. But this is the periodical cicada that takes either 13 or 17 years to develop in the ground, which is a pretty cool thing. And this brood 10 takes 17 years. And I went to my niece's graduation in May of 2004, and I got to hear this. I had to excuse myself from some of the normal family things and say, you know what, my family and I have to go listen and see to cicadas and see cicadas. Turn it up a little bit. You can probably tell the difference from what you hear in the summer when you're just hearing one. This is many, many cicadas. Well, something to look forward to is that brood 10 is coming around again. In Maryland and some of these other states that are mentioned here, they actually had a little bit of a early part of the brood in 2020. But Maryland again, as I saw, 17 years ago, we'll be having the brood. So stay tuned for that, especially if we get to travel and you, get to go to one of these states. Pay attention, because it's pretty cool to see them in person. So, we know that there are some really great things about insects. They help break down organic matter. They provide food for other insects. They're water quality indicators. As master gardeners, I'm sure you're aware, or as gardeners, I should say, to be master gardeners, pollination is one of the things that's really important to us that insects do. 80% of the pollination of food crops is provided by insects. And we've been learning more and more how much our native insects do, bumblebees and other native insects that some of us maybe weren't really aware of until we had some trouble with diseases in our honeybees and we needed to go paying attention to who was doing our pollinating. So the other aspect of insects is they can be pests and they can be a little bit scary. And this year in 2020, we had a lot of scary things happening. And in this, a pandemic, the economy reeling, quarantines, no sports, what's next? These Asian giant hornets, which is what entomologists want to call them, were dubbed murder hornets in Japan, I think. And that stuck with the media. And so we heard a lot about murder hornets, which Washington is not happy to be dealing with because they do kill honeybees. We just talked about how important pollinators were. And so we don't want them to come here either. And we will be looking for them, paying attention. We certainly want anybody to let us know. And many, many Rhode Islanders have sent me pictures of European hornets and cicada killers. Those are the two that really look quite a bit like it. But I like now for a welcome break from pandemic news. It really was not. But this guy in the getup that looks like an astronaut suit is Chris Looney from Washington State, who has taken on this task in Washington. And he shrink wrapped a tree and vacuumed out the murder hornets, which included 200 females that could have started a new colony. So hopefully Washington State is in better shape. And hopefully we won't be seeing these, but you can kind of see how insects sometimes take, the media can really exaggerate some of what's going on with these things. Speaking of exaggeration, we do deal with mosquitoes and cockroaches in our house. Those are other ways we interact with insects that we're not too thrilled with. Luckily, they're not this size, though. And as gardeners, you really interact with them a lot as plant pests. And so, especially when we get into the integrated pest management portion of my presentations, I want to just give you a little bit of an idea of that, we can accept a certain amount of damage due to insects and talk about, how you decide that and how you make your decisions. And if it's your garden, obviously you make your own decisions, but when you're working with other, people, or if you're working in a group or something, it's going to be helpful to have some strategies to know what to do when you do run into pests like this. So that'll be the integrated pest management portion. But for here, we're just going to go a little bit more and learn some things about insects. So I always found this fascinating, especially because everybody who learns I'm an entomologist thinks that I know every single insect that they might show me. And I wish I was a better taxonomist, but it really would be hard to do that. So the number of different species of insects adds up to more than everything else combined. So that's pretty impressive. And this may be my, maybe as many as 30 million, and we've only described several 100,000. So there's probably many, many more, and people are finding new insects all the time. I am experiencing there we go. So just to kind of see where insects fit in the scheme of animals, we start with, they are animals, and they're in the phylum Arthropoda. So people call them arthropods. And within arthropods, you also have things like lobsters and crabs, crustacea, arachnids, spiders, and insects. And it's funny because insects and spiders are classed together a little bit more. People don't usually ask me if I know anything about crabs and lobsters, but they certainly send me spiders to ID. So then the orders, we're not really going to talk about orders too much, except you'll see it a little bit as I go through some of my descriptions of things. But all the orders is the major classes or groupings of insects as we identify them. And most of them you'd be pretty familiar with. For example, Coleoptera are beetles. You separate beetles from wasps and from flies and from Lepidoptera, which are butterflies and moths. So it's those major categories. And then when you take an entomology class, you break it down one step further into families. And maybe Alana and I, when we do our in-person lecture, we might tell you a little bit more about families. So this is the description of insects you get when you're in elementary school, middle school, high school. What differentiates insects from some of those other arthropods? So they have 6 legs. Spiders have 8. They have jointed appendages. They also have antennae that have many different segments. And most have wings, but those are the adults. We'll look at a lot of different life cycles so you can see that adult stages are not the same. Sometimes people will see an adult like that and they'll say, well, is it fully grown? And that's one of the things that will help you identify things, is to realize that if it's an adult, it is fully grown, that the immature stages often look very, very different with some insects, not as much with others. And then the exoskeleton is the hard outer skeleton of the insect. They don't have an internal skeleton like us. It's like crabs, lobsters, it's on the outside. So a grasshopper is often used as sort of a good description of a general insect body. And so here are some of the parts. The main parts are the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. And that can be important when you're identifying insects, because legs come off of the thorax. You might have characteristics that they'll say are on the abdomen or on the thorax or on the head. So dividing those up is important. Spiracles, that's how an insect breathes, through those spiracles. Wings, jumping legs for a grasshopper. We'll see other insects have different types of legs, walking legs in the front. So that's the 3 pairs. They all come off of the thorax, but the first 2 pairs look more like what you expect insect legs to look like. And then since this is a grasshopper, it has the long jumping ones. Insect mouth parts are important. They have compound eyes. They also often have simple eyes, which doesn't show up on this grasshopper, and antennae. So then if you look at a wasp like this, it has pretty much the same basic parts, even though it appears very different. Head, thorax, abdomen, wings, legs, antennae. And I mentioned the legs. They can vary so much. You look at the praying mantis, of course, they call them the raptorial front legs, which are what it uses to grasp prey. Praying mantis move really fast when they're about to grab prey. And Roger LeBrun, who teaches or taught, I think he's just retired, but who taught for many, many years introductory entomology at the University of Rhode Island. So even 40 years ago when I took it, talks about how, I think it's Tai Chi, comes from some of the movements of the praying mantis. And grasshoppers, of course, have those long legs, and mole crickets, they call them fossorial front legs. Those are more for digging because they go into the soil. So swimming insects, you won't be dealing with those in your garden, but I think they're kind of fun. This one is a back swimmer, so it looks like it's swimming upside down, and that's the way its legs move. They also have a lot of hairs, which repel the water as they move. And this shows you that underwater. This is, people call them water spiders sometimes, but it's a water strider, and it walks upon the water. There's a really lovely poem about water striders that I like. I don't think I can remember it right now, but you can sort of see a little circle around each leg. And so basically those legs have the hairs that repel the water. It allows them to use surface tension of the water to walk on top of the water. And we already saw a grasshopper with its legs, but this is an actual grasshopper instead of a drawing. And you've seen it as you walk through grass, not knowing anybody's in there. These guys will jump right ahead of you as you move along. Cricket, it's in the same order as grasshopper, so they have similar jumping hind legs. And then we talk about insect antennae, and this allows them to detect like pheromones from other insects, which are chemicals produced by insects. And so they're in many different forms, and the males and the females often often differ, partly because it's often the female who attracts the male. And so the male has to have a greater capacity to, to detect these chemicals or pheromones. And so antennae are often, very often used in identifying individual species based on the shape or the number of segments. If you didn't have an old TV with antennae, this joke probably doesn't make any sense to you, but I used to have to try to alter our TV antenna, and I would be told by my dad, just stand there and hold it, just hold it, the antenna, just like that, so we can watch TV. Wings are another variation. Obviously, each order has very different wings, but even then within species, they might be different. And there's fore wings and hind wings. So the two front wings are the fore wings, and then there's two hind wings generally, except for flies that only have one pair of wings. And so in the bees, they're kind of hooked together. So they, they move together. Instead of in other insects, you'll see they move separately. Dragonflies, you'll see them folded up. Sometimes people will call these all dragonflies, but the damselfly is actually the one that holds them back like that at rest. And dragonfly wings that are held straight out like this at rest. Beetles are kind of curious. They sometimes look like little tanks flying. The forewings or front wings are rigid and are sort of pulled out of the way. And it's really the hind wings that seem to do most of the flying. So if you have a beetle in your house, even a small ladybug can kind of sound, like a little airplane coming along. A little bit about the insect exoskeleton. I don't really want to go too much into it. There is an entomology class called Insect Structure, where you draw and learn all about the various layers of the exoskeleton. It wasn't my favorite class. I'm not an artist, but it is pretty cool to learn about it. But it's mostly made of cuticle. And one of the fascinating things, you see this cicada here. We had talked about maybe seeing the brood of cicadas emerging. If you're there at the time that they crawl out of the ground and then they emerge like this and become an adult, it's pretty cool to see. I think I was a little bit late when I was in Maryland, but that's the exoskeleton. They call them shed skins sometimes, or a shed exoskeleton, or exuviae is another word, but it all means that the way the insect looked isn't the same anymore. So mouth parts are another important part. They're tools in a way, like this drawing, but insects do have a variety of different mouth parts. And they've sort of evolved over the years, and something like a grasshopper is considered, more original or ancient. And then things like mosquitoes or butterflies. So the one in the upper right would be a butterfly for siphoning mouth parts, like a proboscis that they use to get nectar. And then the lower one is probably a mosquito. I'm not sure about all of the others, but we're going to go into each of them. So you have chewing mouth parts like a grasshopper. And so there's mandibles and maxillae, and anyway, there's various parts that work together, and it allows you, it's sort of a downward movement to chew up plant material. And so these are some of the insects that have chewing mouth parts: grasshoppers, beetles, caterpillars, and you'll see holes taken out of leaves for that. And here's lily leaf beetle. I've worked with for a number of years, and I'll be talking about it in another lecture, but the adults chew holes out of leaves, and the immatures chew also, and will chew down a whole leaf. Borers, the immature stage of a beetle, will chew holes out of trunks. So if the female has laid eggs on a tree and the immatures go into the tree, they feed under the bark for a while. When they come out, they chew this hole in the trunk. And those are the holes that you see on the outside after an insect has fed like that. And that's the kind of thing that causes woodpeckers to come along, and they're looking for the immatures before they come out. Insects that have piercing, sucking mouth parts are generally in the order Hemiptera. They're what we call true bugs. Sometimes entomologists will give people a hard time for calling things bugs instead of insects. I don't mind. To me, it's fine. I know what people mean they're bugs, but this one particular order of insects are called bugs. So if you see something referred to, or specifically, oh, that's a bug, this is what they might mean, is something that has these sucking mouth parts. And we have so many plant pests that have sucking mouth parts. Aphids are one of them. And you can see aphids, they're basically, removing a lot of the chlorophyll. They're sucking from the plant, and it ends up being speckled either lighter green or sometimes white or gray. And aphids are sucking in all that plant material, so then they excrete a honeydew. And when they excrete honeydew, it makes the plant sticky and attractive to things like wasps or ants. And then also fungi can grow on it, and you get sooty mold, like this black leaved picture in the middle. So aphids do a lot of damage. Lace bugs are beautiful. They feed on the undersurface of leaves, but they do a lot of damage too. And so that's another sucking insect. So true bugs, aphids, whiteflies, leafhoppers, they all have that proboscis or sucking mouth parts. And here's a few more. I showed lacebug damage. Brown marmorated stink bug is an introduced insect that we're getting more of little by little. We've had them quite a few years. We don't get too many complaints, but they do overwinter in houses. So you might see them there. We might talk about them a little bit more when we get into specific insects. And this Western conifer seed bug definitely overwinters in houses in Rhode Island, and has intimidated people a little bit, because when it flies around, the way it, its wings open up, it looks a little bit like a wasp. Its coloring is a little bit wasp-like, with the whitish lines, and but it doesn't really do any damage. It's similar to stink bugs in that it might smell a bit, and it's a bit of a nuisance, but it won't sting or anything. Box elder bug, I don't see them that much, but they look a little bit like milkweed bugs, and they seem to congregate on the outside of homes, and especially white surfaces. So then, we have the mosquito is another piercing, sucking type, but for blood. So it has a proboscis as well, stylets that kind of cut through the surface of the skin. And I mentioned siphoning mouth parts. They're adapted for siphoning nectar from flowers, and we've all seen that. It's pretty cool. And you can also see where we rear them, and you put just water on maybe a enclosure that they're in, and you can see them taking the water that way too. I'm going to take a quick sip so that I'm not having a scratchy throat. Okay, so more pictures of all the different mouth parts associated with butterfly feeding. So I think it's really important to know life cycles. And so we'll start with saying that some insects have incomplete metamorphosis, like cockroaches, true bugs, grasshoppers. And some, this is a grasshopper with an incomplete life cycle. And so the adult female lays eggs, they hatch. You get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different stages of nymphs, and they molt and shed that skin each time. And after the 5th molt, you have an adult. And so it's called incomplete because there's not a real metamorphosis stage. They just gradually get larger. And so then complete metamorphosis you'll see in beetles, flies, and butterflies. And so we're real familiar with an insect like a monarch that goes through. The female lays eggs on the undersides of leaves. Caterpillars hatch from the eggs. You can also call them larvae, but specifically for butterflies, they're caterpillars. And then they form a pupa, or in this case, the beautiful ones like the monarchs, we call a chrysalis, and the adult butterfly emerges. Show a couple of other of those, that the same kind of metamorphosis happens with beetles. Eggs hatch, you have a larva. This larva looks like a little worm, but it's going to become a ladybug, which is a beneficial insect. There's the pupa with the resting stage. In the pupal stage, insects don't eat, and then it emerges as a fully formed adult. If you happen to catch them when they first emerge, they may not look fully formed. They're a little bit lighter in color and soft, but they form harder coating, and they're full of pigment after like a day, or sometimes a little bit less. So every life stage has different adaptations. You know, some insects are colorful to say that, hey, I'm kind of toxic, don't eat me. Some are camouflaged so that you don't see them. These are the Asian, multicolored Asian lady beetle that has been another one of those household interlopers. And I don't see them quite as much anymore, but when we first got them, you know, there were many on the outside of homes, and we'll still get, I get a few occasionally. Colorado potato beetles, one of our vegetable pests, and they have a complete metamorphosis, cucumber beetles. And so, and those, yeah, I guess those are cucumber beetles in the upper left also. So, you know, you'll see the immature stage often doing the most damage, but maybe the adult stage is what alerts you to the fact that, hey, I've got a pest problem and they're probably going to lay eggs, and I'm probably going to get really destructive larvae or caterpillars coming along. Imported cabbage worm is another one of those. You'll see on things like your broccoli, it goes through, you might see those little cabbage whites flying around, and maybe you don't connect that with these worms on your broccoli. Those are those really kind of velvety caterpillars or worms. They get really large. And the nice thing is that these have a couple of parasites. And so we might talk about that a little bit more, but just be aware that if you see something like these little white cocoons in the bottom middle, or the yellow ones in the lower right, those are something that you could leave to help spread this biological control agent or parasitoid to manage your cabbage worms. I just threw in a couple of additional caterpillars for fun. Cecropia are beautiful. They're one of our largest moths. Cabbage loopers, another pest, and saddleback. You won't want to touch something that looks like that. I think most people would figure that out. But I have 2 or 3 really nice caterpillar books, and they're always loved by my students when we find them when we're out in the field. Reproduction obviously is so important for insects, and they have very different ways. A mayfly only lives for a day, so it actually emerges. They don't even eat; they just mate and then die. But I think this is maybe a fly. Insect life cycles can be very, very short. Some are longer, but some are pretty short. And insects find their mates in varying ways. And so I just threw a couple of these in. Light is one. You've seen fireflies in June, and the female is hanging out in the leaf litter or in the woods lower down near the ground, and the males are flying. And they fly at different heights, but they fly along, and the females flash a certain code of light, and the males are looking for that, and they flash back. And it's a pretty cool system, and there's books written all about it if you're interested. There's also citizen science projects about fireflies, and I keep thinking I'm going to do it, and then I'm so busy with my job in the summer that I haven't done it yet. But you can look that up. They also use sound to find each other, and there's crickets that use sound that you hear pretty much all the time, but a lot in the summer. And the katydid, which I love to hear in the summer. And there's a cool thing about the crickets that you can use them as a thermometer. They get faster. Their number of chirps gets faster as the temperature goes up. So if you count the number of chirps in 14 seconds and add 40, you get the outdoor temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. Chemical pheromones are used for finding food or mates, aggregating to take advantage of a food source, and escaping predation. They're often used for detecting insects when they're new to an area, like early detection of a possible pest, or if we have a pest that we want to know where it is, if it's migrating in, or quantify it, see how big a problem it is, we can use chemical pheromones. And I mentioned camouflage. These walking sticks are really great at camouflage. And I like insect cartoons. There's a few around. That's a lot of walking sticks. So that's it. I'll go back to this. And thank you so much for paying attention. It would be nice to talk to you in person. And you'll probably be hearing from the Master Gardeners program about if you have some insect ID issues or whatever that you might want to send to us that we could look at ahead of time for when we meet in person. So again, hope to see you soon. Bye.